Hi, lovelies. Esther here. Now, can I really teach you tarot in 30 minutes? Well, let me start my timer and we'll see. I mean, on the one hand, of course not. I can't teach you tarot in 30 minutes any more than I could teach you French in 30 minutes. The tarot is a language like any other human language, and to really become fluent in it requires a willingness to dedicate ourselves to that task, to dive in, to start playing, to really get kind of obsessive and go off the deep end, spending a lot of time playing with the cards, uh, learning, studying, hanging out with other people who are equally obsessed with the tarot. So on the one hand, no, I can't make you fluent in tarot in 30 minutes, but I can give you the big picture that will allow you to have the framework that enables picking up any deck of cards and beginning to play right now, right where you are today. At the heart of that framework is a recognition that the tarot is structured according to what the mythologist Joseph Campbell called the hero's journey, the story of self-discovery, of moving from a place of ignorance, not knowing who we are, to a place of realization. It's the story of enlightenment, and it's also the story that's embedded in pretty much every pop culture epic tale, from Star Wars to Game of Thrones, every fairy tale and myth, the story of Siddhartha, the historical Buddha, the story of Jesus, right? The story of coming into a recognition of our true nature, which doesn't mean going anywhere, although it often feels like we have to go very far afield because we have to plunge deep into what is unknown in order to come right back to who we are, where we are, right here, in order to realize, hey, there's no place like home. We have to travel a far distance away. So we'll be talking about the hero's journey in a minute. It's a key part of this picture, and the whole tarot is organized around it. We'll also be using this image of the hand, right? The tarot has 5 suits, and those 5 suits are like the fingers and thumb of our hand. They're the 4 suits of the minor arcana that are just like the 4 suits of a modern playing card deck: diamonds, hearts, clubs, and spades. Only in tarot, diamonds are called pentacles, hearts are called cups, spades are called swords, and clubs are called wands, and other decks may have different versions of that terminology. But those 4 very plain suits, which are kind of about the energy and stuff of everyday life, would not do the work of tarot, would have nothing to do with the hero's journey and self-discovery if it weren't for the 5th suit, which is like the thumb that allows our hands to be graspy and powerful and creative, that opposable thumb that marks us as humans with our big old brains, right? That 5th element corresponds to the 5th suit in tarot, which is called often the major arcana. These 4 suits are called the minor arcana. This 5th suit is also called the trump card suits. Trump is a word that comes from the Italian word for triumph. So don't associate it with our former president here in the United States. The trump cards are the cards that have these allegorical, really symbolic images on them. They look really different from the 4 minor suits. They're like the thumb in the tarot card ecosystem. Okay, so we're going to talk about what I call the hand rule tarot, this way of understanding the broad structure of tarot to help us get a framework so that we can start playing with the cards right away. Now, that word hand, I mean, I'm thinking about the hand with its 5 elements, but I'm also thinking about this acronym where H stands for the hero's journey, right? The A stands for ether, and that's the old spelling. You might also be familiar with the Sanskrit term which corresponds to ether, akasha, like the Akashic records. And when we're talking about ether, we're also talking about this 5th element, but we're talking in more broad terms about the elemental structure of the tarot, the way it gives us a picture of the whole universe. The tarot is pretty ambitious. And then we're talking about number. The N of hand is number, and the way the tarot is structured according to numbers. Once we understand how the numbers in these numbered suits, these are playing cards after all, ace, 2, 3, 4, 5, the cards all have numbers, how those numbers map up with the hero's journey. And then the D in hand stands for dialectic, which is just a fancy word for the ways in which the tarot helps us think our way through dualisms. The tarot constantly gives us dualities, right? Self and other, white and black, male and female, good and bad. It gives us all of these dualities in its imagery. And then it invites us to find a resolution between those dualities, those competing terms. It encourages us to find the middle way. Its structure is what we call dialectic. So that's the HAND of hand in this hand rule tarot: hero's journey, ether, number, and dialectic. So let's dive in with talking about the hero's journey. Now, one of the things that can be really daunting when you begin to study tarot is this idea that, oh, I've got 78 cards, I've got to memorize 78 meanings. And then if the card comes out upside down, I have to memorize reversal meanings. Oh my gosh, there's so much memorization. But the tarot isn't about 78 distinct pieces. It's about this system that's interrelated. It's an ecosystem. And this ecosystem is defined in terms of the hero's journey. Now, this is Joseph Campbell's definition of the hero's journey. A hero ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are there encountered and a decisive victory is won. The hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man. So, this is true of every epic, every fairy tale, most pop films, science fiction, fantasy. It's like this moving away from every day into a world that's not every day at all, where we encounter the deep, dark shadows of our unconscious, really, and then we come forward back into the light of the common world, but our understanding has been transformed. He breaks the journey as we see it in myth and pop culture and religion and folklore and, Hollywood films. He breaks it down into a very complicated structure that he calls the monomyth, the myth that's behind basically all mythology, he says, and it has 17 components to it. I've simplified that. 17 is a lot. I've simplified it to 10, and I want to tell the story of the hero's journey in 10 discrete moments using Judy Garland. When in doubt, use Judy. This is, of course, referring to The Wizard of Oz, which if you haven't watched it recently, I highly recommend watching that film again. So, the hero's journey, the starting point is us being completely content with our lives. And that's usually what happens like at the beginning, like even before the story begins. Like Dorothy Gale, everything's fine. Kansas is wonderful. It's perfect. But then, we've met her for like 30 seconds and then we realize, oh, she's not so happy. That crack, right, becomes apparent, like the crack in the concrete Buddha. And this is an image here. The second image with her and Toto is Dorothy singing Somewhere Over the Rainbow, where we start to get this glimpse that there's something else out there, that we're not kind of the only component of the world, that something's missing. We get a sense of otherness, of there being something else, something missing. And that recognition of otherness brings with it, pretty close at hand, a recognition of life's fragility, of life's force, of the possibility of death, right? Of mortality. And that in this film, in this version of the hero's journey, takes the form of Miss Gulch, who is threatening Toto, Dorothy's alter ego, right? She's going to take Dorothy away and Toto away and kill him. And that recognition of mortality, right? Of life and death, that is a pivotal point. And in the story of Dorothy Gale, that point leads right into Dorothy running away and then returning home because she's worried about her aunt dying. She comes back home and we get a tornado, right? The twister, and everything changes. Now that turning point that's occasioned by the hero or the heroine's brush with mortality, with the forces of life and death, leads to a recognition that there's a path, that we actually have to discipline ourselves and follow the yellow brick road. If we want anything to change, we've got to take ourselves on a journey. And that journey has some requirements. If we're lucky, we meet comrades and companions. That tends to happen in these stories. But we also meet, here's Dorothy with the Wicked Witch of the West. We also meet powerful figures that threaten us. So we come up to face a world that is strong and powerful and could crush us. But facing that world also makes us realize the importance of grace, of heaven, of what's on the other side of the rainbow. In the story of Dorothy Gale, it's about the Emerald City as the ideal glittering place where all promises are fulfilled. It's heaven, really, right? So we encounter powerful, scary forces, but we also encounter the possibility of grace, of redemption, of finding the truth. And we encounter guidance from above. So this is a picture of Glinda the Good, who saves Dorothy from the field of poppies, right? So we don't just encounter grace as an abstract ideal, we actually encounter celestial guidance, help along the path. But the next moment in the hero's journey is we encounter guidance, but we also encounter shadow, our hidden, darker sides, which in the story of Dorothy Gale takes the form of the flying monkeys, the most terrifying part of the movie, right? These like nightmare figures that we see in the darkness, right? That are going to carry us away. It's the shadow side that we all have to plunge into on this journey of self-discovery. We have to go into the dark and mysterious depths. We have guidance, we have grace, but we have to go into darkness. That guidance can help us, but that journey into the shadow must be undertaken in order for us to come into the light. And this is Dorothy meeting not just the wizard, but the man behind the curtain, right? The moment of light and enlightenment where actually all curtains are pulled back and we see what's really true, which we weren't able to see before we encountered the shadow. And once we've seen what's really true, we can really come full circle, recognizing our true destiny, which is to be exactly who we are, who we always were all along. As Glinda tells Dorothy at the end of The Wizard of Oz, you had the power to go home anytime, you just had to know it. It's right there, just there's no place like home. Tap your shoes together and you're back. So that's the story of the hero's journey as seen through The Wizard of Oz. Instead of the 17 pieces that Joseph Campbell laid out, I've laid it out in 10. This movement from a kind of sort of wholeness of the self, our starting point. For those of you who are already familiar with the tarot deck, this is kind of the position of the fool, but also the magician, that sense of I am here, I've got power, I've got the whole universe at my fingertips, everything's fine. And then, oh, maybe something's missing. This encounter with otherness. Somewhere over the rainbow, there's an answer, but something's missing here. A recognition of life's force and the possibility of death. Moving on to the path, following the yellow brick road. So a willingness to undertake a kind of discipline, to be on a quest, to do some stuff that's hard, to, Frodo to go on the path with Samwise Gamgee, right? This is the hard stuff, the discipline. And once we take up that path, we're going to encounter scary things, powerful forces, but we're also going to encounter grace and guidance. And that guidance will help us as we find our way into shadow, into what's unknown, into the abyss of our own unconscious. We have to go down before we can come back up into the light, have all curtains pulled back, have the truth be revealed, and encounter our true and authentic destiny, which is who we were all along. We just didn't know it until we went through this journey. So these are the 10 stages laid out through The Wizard of Oz: self, other, life and death, discipline, that encounter with powerful forces beyond our control, that encounter with grace, with guidance, delving into shadow, coming back into the light, and finding our destiny. There's no place like home. This is the structure that maps out onto the tarot. And as we'll see in a minute, it maps out onto the cards of the major arcana, those trump cards, those cards with the funny allegorical images on them. Okay. A, Aether, spelled in this old-fashioned way, or Akasha. Now, according to ancient and medieval science, our universe comprises ether, plus 4 material elements: earth, water, air, and fire. Ether fills the region of the universe above the terrestrial sphere. It's also called the quintessence, or 5th element, or Akasha, that's the Sanskrit word, the void or space in which all material things exist. And as I suggested at the beginning of this video. Aether, that image of the cosmos as having this kind of celestial or that celestial space, the void, right? This place beyond the material realm, the heavens, that corresponds with the major arcana. The 4 suits of the tarot, the minor arcana suits, correspond with the 4 material elements. We'll see that a slide about that in a second. We might think about the relationship between the ether and the 4 material suits in terms of this relation of heavens and earth, or the cosmos and creation. And the ether is kind of like the space that contains the 4 elements: earth, water, air, and fire. This is a classical vision of the cosmos, that there's this ethereal void or womb or space or emptiness, the region beyond created matter, and it holds the 4 material elements. As I was saying, this is the same structure that we see in the tarot, where the major arcana is the suit of ether, of this broad cosmological vision. And it sort of holds together the integrity of the 4 minor arcana suits. The 4 suits that correspond with the minor arcana that are like our modern playing cards. Like our modern playing cards, they have ace through 10, but then they have court cards. Now, in a modern playing card deck, we just have 3 court cards. We have the jack and the queen and the king. In tarot, there's a 4th court card. So we have page and knight. That jack is kind of split into two figures. We have page and knight, queen and king. Okay. And I'm realizing there's going to be a card here that's confusing because I have a typo in my deck, in my slide deck. You'll see in a second. But so the 4 minor suits, the pentacles, the cups, the swords, and the wands, which are like discs, which are like diamonds, hearts, spades, and clubs in a modern playing card deck, they correspond to 4 elements. The tarot is showing us, this is so cool. The tarot is showing us, right, the world of creation as held together by this cosmological vision, which corresponds to the hero's journey. Now, here's where the typo is. Pretend that this is not the King of Swords, but the Knight of Swords. The court cards also correspond to 4 elements. So all of the pages correspond to earth. All of the queens correspond to water. All of the kings correspond to air, and all the knights, pretend this was the knight, correspond to fire. So in addition to the 4 suits of pentacles, cups, swords, and wands, we have 4 court figures that also correspond to the 4 material elements. So how cool is this? The elemental qualities of the tarot, right, which help us read it, help the tarot map onto a vision of the whole universe, right? Relate to major arcana is like the ether, and the minor arcana are like the 4 material elements, including the way each of the court cards maps on to one of the elements. We'll see how this plays out at the end of this video in a reading. Okay, we're coming up on things. We're getting there. So the N for number. The meaning of individual cards reflects sequences of 10. 10 fingers on both hands. This is hand rule tarot. The hands have it. Where cards numbered 5, or that V for the Roman numeral 5, or 10, that X for the Roman numeral 10, signify a turning point. So how the cards are numbered in a sequence, whether it's an ace or a 4, right, relate in this way to number and the meaning of number, which maps on, as we'll see in a second, back to the hero's journey. And the important thing here, I think, is remembering, because this is hand rule tarot, that 5s and 10s are really important. The 5s, like that, it's the thumb card, and it represents a turning point. When we see fives in the tarot, we see a turning point. When we see tens in the tarot, which are two fives, right? Two V's coming together, they also represent a turning point. So every time you see a 10, every time you see a 5, you're like dealing with a thumb in the tarot. You're dealing with a card that gives us a turning point. So here's where the rubber meets the road. So these are the major arcana in the most popular tarot card system out there, the Rider-Waite or the Waite-Smith tarot. And in this image, you can see I've taken, there are 22 cards in the major arcana, but I've separated out the Fool and the World, because the hero's journey is in many ways, it's the story of how we go from not knowing anything, being the fool, to knowing everything. It's the story of enlightenment. The major arcana is telling the hero's journey. And it's telling the hero's journey in terms of an inner version of the story. And then this 10 offers a turning point. Now we're kind of moving outward. Because remember, you know, the thing about the hero's journey is we go out and we come back home. And that allows us actually to keep growing. This journey of self-discovery is never over. It's more like a widening spiral. You know, and in fact, if you think about Dorothy Gale and the Frank Baum, is that the author? The books about Oz, Dorothy keeps having more adventures. The hero's journey never ends. That self-discovery keeps happening. And this is certainly what it's like to be a seeker in my experience. You make one circuit, it's like, oh, I've realized something. I've come out of shadow into the light. I've understood something. I've expanded. And now I'm doing the same thing on another level. So the 1 through 10 and 11 through 20 of the major arcana tell the same story, the hero's journey, but they tell it sort of at a first level and then sort of version 2.0, an inner or personal level and an outer and cosmic level. And the story they tell, these are the 10 stages I talked about before: self, other, life and death, discipline, power, grace, guidance, shadow, light, destiny. And we can see that mapping on here, the way the magician is this figure of ego or self. I mean, he's standing there so phallic with his, it's more like this, with his wand, his phallus, right? He's in control of everything. It's like, all is good. And then the high priestess comes in and she reminds us of otherness, of what we don't know, of duality, right? But once we've encountered that otherness, we can also encounter the truth of life and death. And the Empress, in the traditional imagery, she's pregnant. Now, in the second version, the Hero's Journey version 2.0, we literally have death. So we have, with the Empress, a pregnant mother, that sort of vision of life. And in the death figure, we have the vision of death. The Emperor, a figure of power and a figure of discipline, control, rule, and sway. The Hierophant is a vision of power, though. Look how he's standing over, he's the Pope standing over his minions. The Lover is a vision of grace, of the eye of heaven. The Chariot, the sense of guidance. In this case, the guidance is the charioteer who drives his team, his sphinxes in this version. When we come down into the outer, more cosmic telling of the hero's tale, we see that guidance takes the form of the Star of Bethlehem, faith, right? This pole star, the North Star that guides us. Shadow. So strength, means in this imagery of the lady with her lion, the strength of encountering our bestial nature, right? That which is shadow, that which is, how she tames her relationship to the natural world is what the Strength card is all about. It really is about encountering that side of us that is not reasonable, that is not logical, that side of us that's fleshly, that we can't quite control. And then in the Moon, the parallel to this card in the outer version of the hero's tale, this is really about what's in shadow, what we barely understand, what's in the watery depths of the unconscious. And then moving into light, the Hermit with his lamp, the sun, and then encountering destiny, whether it's the fate of the Wheel of Fortune or the destiny of that call of resurrection. So this is the hero's journey. It's what structures the major arcana. And we can see how ones in this correspond with self, twos, whether it's the 2 of the high priestess or the 12, the 10 plus 2 of the hanged man, that sort of encountering of otherness, and so forth. And that same relationship of 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, and these pivotal moments of 5s and 10s get played out in the minor arcana, but where the major arcana has that ethereal sense of this, gravitational, huge forces of the cosmos, right? When we're dealing with the minor arcana, we're looking much more at the ways in which, in a much more earthly sense, these moments of the hero's journey express themselves. So, it becomes more generic, less cosmic. Instead of self, we're talking about source. The ways in which the aces in the minor arcana have to do with the source of the energy of this suit, whether it's pentacles, earth, cups, water, swords, air, or wands, fire. And so these keywords that I've written out for you all, they're just the words that correspond with the hero's journey as it gets expressed in these cards. Notice how the 5s are about these moments of higher control over what's going on there, these turning points where something new is revealed, where there's a kind of hierarchy, where there's a kind of extra thumb, right, that's now controlling what's going on beneath. And if we had time, I would look at the 5s in each of the 5 suits of the tarot, and we talk about how they express that turning point. It's a little bit easier to see perhaps in the 10s, where we have, quite clearly this turning point of the Wheel of Fortune or of the image of Judgment Day. So these keywords come right back down to that story of discovery and self-realization that is the hero's journey, just articulated slightly differently in the major arcana, where it's more in this ethereal cosmic realm, and then in the minor arcana, where this is more about what's going on earth. This is much more mundane, and it's related to the 4 elemental qualities. So now, last piece, the D for dialectic. And I'm at 30 minutes, so this may be tarot in 35 minutes. Ooh. Okay. The dialectic, that term just means the resolution of opposites through a synthesis or middle way. The tarot continually presents dualities, and these show us, and then shows us how these can be resolved at a higher or more expanded level of understanding. The tarot keeps showing us how we go from either or to both and, to a more inclusive, more resolved vision of life, more expansive vision of life. Dialectic in philosophical terms is about like the assertion of a thesis or an argument, and then the way that assertion inevitably brings forth its shadow or its what's left out. So I say love is the most important thing in the world, and I'm like, well, but does that leave out something? Love is the most important thing in the world, but so is justice. Right? Justice is really important, getting a fair share. So I talked about love, but I left out justice. And the synthesis might be to say, well, hey, but justice is love in action. Ooh, I've resolved what seemed to be a dichotomy between love and justice. And now I have a new thesis, that justice is love in action. And now that becomes the beginning for a new iteration, just like the tarot is always taking us from circle to ever widening circle. We see this structure of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis of the dialectic in so many tarot cards, like it's baked into the imagery of the card. So we say, okay, there's male, there's female, and now there's the eye of heaven that joins male and female together in the image of the lovers. So that tripartite structure gets repeated in imagery in the tarot, and it's baked into the very structure of the tarot. In fact, it's baked into the way the hero's journey unfolds as we head out into the world and we encounter our shadow, and then we integrate that shadowy side into a fuller understanding of who we are. This is an image from a historical tarot deck, what's called the Tarot de Marseille, from the Suit of Swords, just to show you how blatant this structure is in the movement from an ace to a 2 to a 3, where we see, oh, okay, here's the thesis and here's the response, the antithesis. And now we have a synthesis that brings them together in the 3 of Swords. So the structure of dialectic is baked into the imagery of the tarot in very explicit ways. It's also the structure that we express every time we do a tarot spread to do a reading. Tarot readings are all inevitably dialectical, because if you put down more than one card, you end up having to bring those 2 cards together. So for me, the fundamental tarot card spread is the Chariot spread, which is explicitly, it's a spread that I developed. It's explicitly a spread that's about dialectical reasoning, about how we get from opposites to synthesis. So the Chariot is the 7th trump, and it's a card that shows us, again, 2 opposites and a resolution, just like the Lovers also showed us that. So I did this spread before I made my PowerPoint. And the question I was having was, what do I need to know as a tarot teacher? So I laid out 3 cards. I laid out a card in the light that represents light, and a card that represents shadow. So just like the Chariot, we have these 2 cards. One is what's in the light and one is what's in shadow. And this is like the charioteer in the imagery. This is the synthesis of those 2. So my reading is going to have to look at these 2 cards as sort of 2 sides of the same coin of light and shadow, and then how those opposites, that duality, might be resolved. My reading itself is going to be kind of dialectic, and every tarot spread has baked into it that dialectic structure. The D in hand, hero's journey, ether, number, dialectic. So what do I need to know as a tarot teacher? Now, in the card that corresponds with the white sphinx, this is the card that corresponds to the light. This is the card that corresponds to the dark sphinx or the shadow. So I'm going to be working with this spread dialectically to see how these 2 cards oppose each other, but then also how we can synthesize them together. So light and dark, what's in the light, what's in the shadow, what I know maybe right off the top, what maybe is a little bit hidden, and then how these 2 are resolved. Now, the Queen of Swords. So like all queens, she relates to the element of water, to what flows, to the spirit, to the emotional register. But she's water of swords, and the swords relate to the air. The air is the suit of mind, right? Of our ability to kind of penetrate things, to wrap around things, just like air can create, can carve through the narrowest nook or cranny in a building and sort of blow right in. But air also surrounds everything, just like our minds. So she's water of air. The Queen of Swords has this quality to her of both really being emotional, right? But also being kind of rational and intellectual. These are qualities that make sense for a tarot teacher, right? I've got to be able to articulate my viewpoints really clearly, really incisively, like a sword, but I also have to be empathic and understand who I'm teaching to. I have to somehow balance both of those sides. I have to be Queen of Swords to be a good teacher. But the 8 of Cups, now if we remember that the 8 in the journey, right? Going back to 8. 8 is the place of shadow and letting go in that hero's journey, right? Going into the darkness. And the 8 of Cups, right? Cups are about water. They're also, because they're about water, they're about emotions and what's flowing and fluid, right? So this sense of a kind of spiritual willingness to go into the darkness, to go into, to surrender into, letting go into what I don't understand. So on the one hand, that incisive quality, very relational, thinking about who my audience. On the other hand, whoa, I've got to have that Eight of Cups quality of being able to linger in what is dark and unknown, being able to surrender to the moon, to mysterious forces that aren't quite in my control, to intuition. So this is, the thesis and antithesis. To be a good tarot teacher, I need to be the Queen of Swords. To be a good tarot teacher, I need to be the Eight of Cups. How do I resolve them? The answer is the Four of Swords. Now, fours, right? Fours are about discipline. They're about, right, that moment where Dorothy sets off on the yellow brick road, follow the yellow brick road. They're also about stability. The Four of Swords is taking that quality of fourness and bringing it to the world of mind, of air, right? And it's like, wow, okay, so this is an image. We can see a lot in this image here of a kind of being in a resting state, a state of meditative repose, finding stability through stasis, through stepping back from action, allowing the mind to rest, that kind of discipline of meditation. So what this is suggesting to me is that the resolution of these two sides of the Queen of Swords with her incisive mind and her ability to kind of make sense of things, but also to relate to her audience, the Eight of Cups with this sense of, okay, I got to go into the dark, into what I don't understand. How do we resolve that? It's, through the discipline of meditative contemplative practice, through meditation, through taking time to just be with the question. It's being in that pose of repose of the Four of Swords. Now, these cards I actually did draw to answer this question, and it's just beautiful how much they open up in a way that makes sense. They open up into this space of being with the question, of meditative, contemplative discipline, of being willing not to have the answers. So that's an example of how to read a chariot spread, which is demonstrating the ways in which our readings need to be dialectic. They need to deal with oppositions and find the middle ground between them. Okay. That was more like 35 minutes, but there you go. Feel free to ask questions below. And if you'd like to know more about how I read tarot, if you'd like to study tarot with me, or join the Mindful Tarot community, information about that below. Thank you so much for your practice.